So this is coming up to 23:25 GMT on Wednesday, the 2nd of September 2020. Now, this is a belated diagnosis of Fleet Street. The newspapers published from London, the English language newspapers, the so-called mainstream newspapers. And we have got here a number of them, not all of them, because the shop that I visited late didn't have the Guardian and the I newspaper and the Financial Times. So what we have here, and I think that probably the Express. So this is the Daily Mail of Wednesday, and followed by the Times, and then followed by the Dirty Digger Rupert Murdoch's The Scum, which is also known as The Sun, and the so-called Daily Mirror, which is supposed to be aligned to the Labour Party, but it is as kind of empty and tabloidy as its so-called circulation rivals. And that is the Boris graph, Daily Boris graph, which has got a more substantial headline than the others that we have seen so far. Record number of young on benefits. Benefits means the kind of state security in this country, supposedly to make up for the absence of any regular legitimate income. So it's supposed to be like along the principle on which the idea of the National Health Service is based. And the National Health Service has never been allowed to breathe properly. It has been strangulated right from the beginning and every day. The only people who are strangulating it are the big business pharma companies, conglomerates, and putting pressure on the NHS system to bulk buy huge billions of worth of pharma. And the consultants, the very small number of people who are given the license to print money for themselves, the consultants, which is a small number, they don't represent the vast majority of people who work on the NHS. A completely separate page on the NHS and the welfare state and the state service and the state benefits. Everything that is supposed to be available on need or on demand under the law is distributed with discrimination, bias, prejudice, and denial when the claimant, the applicant, the person who is supposed to be entitled is either African or Asian. And so therefore extrapolate that across the other state, all these state agencies, and it applies everywhere, which is why I am saying that this diagnosis is unique. You will not see this diagnosis anywhere. And as I said the other day, even Mr. Chomsky, if he ever does anything like this, will not be going into the depth and details of the evidence that I do. And I'm actually updating and really exposing the sham that Alistair Cook's letter from America was. This is, of course, a letter from the UK, but this is a letter from the capital city, London, which is full of massive poverty and deprivation and denial and disenfranchisement, dislocation, displacement. And I will be discussing a little later, for the first time, I'll be summarizing my findings on poverty, what actually constitutes poverty. It's not just physical poverty. It's not just the lack of food and things to eat, or the lack of proper, decent housing. It is much more than that. It is spiritual poverty, it is moral poverty, and it is absolutely ethical poverty. And that is where I shall be discussing poverty in a little while. Now, this Boris graph, record number of young on benefits. Now, obviously, they don't say what ethnicity these young are, but this is obviously a reference to white youngsters. Record numbers of young people are claiming benefits amid growing concern over the economic impact of coronavirus on the prospects of those just starting out in the workplace. The number of under 25s on universal credit almost doubled during lockdown, rising by 250,000 to 538,000. And this was printed, of course, in the evening or late afternoon of Tuesday, the 1st of September. So they were talking about what Rishi Sunak and the Theresa Coffey and others were going to announce during the day that has just gone, Wednesday, the 2nd of September. I shall be coming to Theresa Coffey. Theresa Coffey physically doesn't look like a kind of conservative, because most conservative women are of a particular structure. Theresa Coffey is not of that structure. And she almost kind of inadvertently doesn't represent the physical kind of general structure of a Tory MP or parliamentarian or minister. But despite that kind of deceptive, non-Tory stereotypical appearance, Theresa Coffey is not only a very hardcore believer in the cruelty agenda, the culture of cruelty and deprivation creation, as any Tory, any Thatcher could be expected to be, or any Edwina Carey could be expected to be. And so therefore, when they talk about these record number of young people on benefits, and they say that Theresa Coffey is going to announce, along with the current Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, the finance minister, that is. Whatever they announce or have announced, I shall discuss that in the diagnosis on Thursday, while I'll be looking at the papers on Thursday morning, Thursday, the 3rd of September. So whatever announcements Theresa Coffey was involved with in announcing or making public to apparently address this and the implication of record number of adults being also on doles and the record number of so-called joblessness being caused, as they are saying, by the virus. Whatever the measures would not amount to actually dealing with the real crisis. And the real crisis in this country has been in the kind of works, it has been ongoing. It has been coming up since the 1940s. Because the end of the so-called Second World War was followed by the UK having a government led by the Labour Party man Clement Attlee. And Attlee was clearly an efficient individual and has been given credit for his efficiency and his kind of ability to not be flash and boisterous and boastful. But his regime, or the regime that he fronted, had this National Health Service established. And since that time, since the 4 or 5 years that Attlee was in government, or the Labour Party was in government, the Conservatives have been vigorously dismantling whatever Attlee was beginning to established or launched. And the idea of young people being on social security or on the dole is not something that the Tories were kind of unaware of. What I am asserting on the evidence, and of course, going by what is going on in this country now, or what has been going on in the last 50 years that I'm actively involved in, or have been involved in, studying and observing and experiencing and countering, the agenda has been in the UK one of creating a proportion of poverty, keep people in poverty, a proportion of people without homes, a proportion of people without any proper income, and so forth. So that is, I shall discuss Charlie Marx's analysis of surplus labor and all that in another kind of edition. But nobody, in my understanding, none of the Oxbridge or Russell Group universities has actually done a thorough investigation into the UK economy from the 1945 period onward. What they have done are token studies, not really truthful studies. And I have to say, hasten to add that the Labour Party has been as bad or even worse than the Conservatives. And I'm going by the actual evidence of the policy behavior by the Labour Party while in power, so-called. And of course, after Clement Attlee, the only kind of mildly respectable Labour kind of prime minister was Harold Wilson. Callaghan was a disaster. And Callaghan was a card-carrying member of the racist party. I confronted him in 1977, and he responded in the Connaught room. I think I challenged him and about racism, his regime and his racism and the racism of the Labour Party. And Callaghan responded to me with the absolute ferocity that a racist would show anytime. His facial expression, his contemptuous words and his contemptuous tone, everything. So Callaghan was not suited or suitable for the majority of the people in society that needed a compassionate, caring, dedicated, socially responsible administration to meet their needs. Callaghan didn't. No wonder that Callaghan lost the 1979 election to Margaret Thatcher. And Thatcher was the Trump of her day. And she actually had been creating a Trump-like personality for herself. And the zombies and the gullible people in this country actually swallowed everything she offered by way of racist incitement, hatred, and loads of insecurities around the people in the no income or low income group. So those people supported Thatcher, and they kicked out the regime that was fronted by James Callaghan. So what happened in the Callaghan years, or even in the Wilson years, was that despite whatever was going on inside the government, the ideas that were contained in the 1945 election manifesto for a welfare society, those ideas were destroyed and smashed by the conservative media and the Conservative Party in opposition. And as a result of that, Callaghan easily lost the election to Margaret Thatcher, because the narrative was not, Callaghan did not represent a narrative to address poverty, let alone to confront the creators and imposers of poverty in this country. So when they say that number of young people on benefits is risen, by almost 250,000. They don't say that by taking into account anything that the Labour Party, as the party supposedly in opposition, that is in waiting status, or waiting kind of modus. These people in the Labour Party, Keir Starmer today, Jeremy Corbyn yesterday, and Ed Miliband the day before, and even John Smith before the period of Blair. So all of these people, including Gordon Brown, who is absolutely highly, unduly, and unjustifiably overhyped as an intelligent economist, which is not. So all of these people have failed the narrative, to create a narrative that is consistent with the needs of a society that is decent, fair, and equitable, and that it is not a society that has any number of people being left to languish in poverty and hunger, whatever the background, racist or race or ethnicity. And so this one is not going to be sold by the Labour Party, because the Labour Party has not produced, as I said, the narrative to put the blame for this disaster in economic terms, in poverty creation terms. This disaster at the door of the Conservatives, who have been in power for the last 10 years plus. And the signals that Keir Starmer is giving are actually signals that say that let Johnson make a mess of it, to a point where people want to change. And that is how he's going to plan his route to power, fronting the Labour MPs. And there is nothing original in that, because whether the Labour Party is given the responsibility of clearing out the mess, economic mess, by the Tories, the essential fact is that the Labour Party would clear or clean the mess, but will not get the credit and will not deserve to get the credit, because it is never challenging the fundamental problems inherent in the Conservative manifesto at every level. So the Labour Party has been, in my understanding of the last 60 years, 70 years, since the 1945 kind of election, is this, that the Labour Party has been used as a sponge, as a kind of cleansing kind of thing, to prepare the kind of organs of government for the next Conservatives to take over and use to demolish the rest of society. So the Labour Party is a mentally enslaved party. It is not an independent party that says or speaks like the party that has got the moral legitimacy or the authority to claim to be the government of the United Kingdom. And the Labour Party's unfitness not only is exposed in this, because they haven't got any answer to this. The Labour Party's answer is not just John McDonnell uttering a slogan. That is not what I mean by answer. I mean by answer a considered, a studied response to this, and the response is such that it points the finger correctly, evidentially, the finger of blame at the Tories, and the Conservatives are not doing it. They may be doing the word, they may be doing the slogan based on this, but they are not getting across to the people with the message that it is the Conservatives that have created this massive, historic lack of jobs for the young people. That's where the Labour Party is failing, because it doesn't consider itself to be part of the mainstream of British politics. And then the Torygraph is doing what the Torygraph does, that it is explaining that taxing the capitalists will delay the recovery of the British economy. That's what they're saying. So it's, even if Boris Johnson isn't writing it, I mean, that is where Boris Johnson's allegiances will be found to be located. And there is this main headline on the Daily Mirror of the 2nd of September 2020 is about same-sex kind of pairing on the Strictly Come Dancing. That doesn't show that the mirror is awake. It shows the mirror is totally asleep. It has got hardly visible subheadline on the front page saying that Hancock, the so-called health minister in the cabinet, has lifted lockdown for Tory towns in the north. Like, he's been caught effectively saying that there is no need to continue the lockdown if you are a Tory, because it's not, the whole lockdown is meant for non-Tories. So what they're doing is they're destroying whatever legitimacy there was for the lockdown by behaving in a way that shows that the lockdown is only applicable to non-conservative persons and parties and people. And the Daily Mirror continues to report as if there was no massive homelessness, there was no massive eviction threat coming up in less than 2 weeks, or just about 2 weeks, and there is no racism, discrimination in any field. What I'm saying is that, in view of what I said in the introduction, the preponderance, the predominance of prejudice and bias based on racism should be treated as the biggest social disease, is bigger than the pandemic that we are now going through. And that is how it should be treated, as the biggest disease, but it's not being treated as the biggest disease at all. And they've got all kinds of fancy items. Now here is a piece about the poverty. The Daily Mirror has said the Marcus, who is the footballer, is Rashford, is now doing a thing about poverty, and that's why they're celebrating, because he has been already involved in challenging Johnson in some of the things that Johnson was saying wrongly about the pandemic. And there is no evidence of the Daily Mirror talking about racism, the migrants, or Britain's continuing flouting of the Charter, the Declaration, the treaties, the conventions, all of them upholding human rights and making it unlawful for a signatory country to reject the application or the plea for help by a would-be asylum seeker or migrant, would-be migrant. And the Murdoch, Dirty Digger's son, which is the scum, celebrates Boris Johnson with a stupid headline, Boris hails UK return. There is no UK return for a long time because it is all going down. All the reports suggest, all the reports that are not originating with any tabloid like this scum, but reports based on studies done by other people and reported, albeit briefly, by the Telegraph and the Times and the Guardian. All the reports, all the findings confirm that the virus has not only not gone away, but it is spreading. And the fact that Hancock has removed the lockdown from Tory towns and has retained them in other towns and boroughs shows that they are not actually serious about dealing with the coronavirus or pandemic. They're using it as a tool to grab hold of the political kind of agenda, which is what they're pursuing through Boris Johnson's frontage of the government. They want to exploit the pandemic to make literally and rhetorically the biggest possible coup killings that they can make, meaning they can grab hold of as much money under various shoddy deals and grants and allocations as they are able to. And by the time the rest of society finds out, it will be too late. And they will then be able to, these crooks, plea poverty again in repaying to the public what they stole. Now, this is a lucrative kind of headline in the Times of Wednesday, the 2nd of September, 2020. They read like sensible thing, like foreign aid. Now, foreign is a foreign word, hostile word. It is not a word that indicates any kind of friendship, understanding, tolerance with the people that are actually in poverty, in whose name their government of the day begs for and receives these foreign aid billions under the general supervision of the United Nations, of course. But this is a false, misleading headline and misleading story because the idea is that they're enriching the crooks in the countries where the aid is going. But it's more complicated than that because there is always corruption in those countries. But the corruption is not the whole picture. And the whole picture is that a whole number of people, the vast majority of people who are categorized as homeless and in starvation, they don't have any connection with the government. So whatever hue or color the government is politically, doesn't make any difference in terms of the people who are dying of hunger and starvation and famine and other exploitation back home. And there is no compensatory piece against that kind of misleading stories in either the rest of the Times or, of course, in any of the other papers from Fleet Street. And what they're saying here, they're celebrating the new boss as Director General, of the BBC, who is there celebrating him being on war, on bias and pointless bosses. Now these are things that are not kind of original and not for the first time. They're not new. What they're doing is kind of marking the appointment of this new Director General as an occasion to celebrate, effectively celebrate their years of campaign against the BBC, against the idea of the BBC. And they're not telling the truth, they're hyping up the announcement by the new Director General that he would get rid of the left-wing bias in the BBC, so-called. But the actual bias is right-wing, dishonest, and Brexiteering that the BBC has been caught engaged in the last 5-6 months. And the rest of the Daily Mail. And in this one, the anti-Muslim crusader Martin Amis is apparently confessing that Kingsley Martin was not his father, but it was Philip Larkin who had an affair with his mother, and he was born. So that is the real op-ed story in the Daily Mail. And there is a predictable line about Priti Patel being involved in reviewing sentencing tariffs that applies to killers. And the context is that the murderers or killers of the police constable Harper have got a soft sentence or a soft set of sentences. So it's not a new agenda by the Daily Mail. That is the ordinary agenda of the Daily Mail. It doesn't have society, it doesn't have the world, it doesn't have the economy, it doesn't most certainly have the consequences of war by Britain and Britain's allies that are keeping up the destabilization and destruction of societies across Africa and Asia, thus forcing millions to seek new homes anywhere in the world. And so this foreign aid billions to be spent on British spies. So that is the line that the Priti Patel and Boris Johnson are kind of introducing. And we shall be talking about that more in the next edition and in the editions that follow the next one. And they're saying that Boris Johnson has recruited to be the head of the Home Civil Service, a civil servant who was ousted last time when he was in post because of his pro-Brexit line. So these are tittle-tattle, they're not really huge stories about accountability being absent and racism being rampant in every level, in every society, and that poverty and hunger are being created by the current government as they were created by the last Labour government fronted by Gordon Brown, who came into office in January in May 2010. And Libby Parvis, who is a extreme racist, but has got the style of a kind of camouflaged Teresa Coffey. So she is now having a go at the new kind of so-called lefties in the BBC after the arrival of the new Director General. Because she's saying that the lefties will not be laughing anymore, which means that they are really kind of very much relieved that the BBC's new Director General has already announced a fascistic purge of anyone allegedly suspected of being a lefty, whatever that is. And so there is no sign of any accountability that is owed to the public, to society, to ordinary standard of truth and decency and the ordinary standards of journalism that the Director General should be held accountable to. So there is no difference. There is no difference between the Fleet Street gang having a go at the outgoing Director General or in their celebration of the person who is going to be appointed in that post. Okay, we shall be talking more about this in the next edition. This is coming up to just after midnight into Thursday, the 3rd of September 2020.